Okay, I'd like to convene the Ways and Means Committee to order, and good morning to everybody. Ms. Bellman tells us she's keeping the roll. We do have a quorum present. We do have the minutes to approve. Representative Olson.
Mr. Chair, I move the adoption of the minutes dated April 29, 2020.
Okay, the motion is before us, and we'll need to unmute. We'll do this by voice vote. So all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. We have three bills on the agenda this morning, and like to go over a few points. We will be voting a couple of the bills out separately, but we'll be also combining the bills, and this is into a single bill, and that's to give us more latitude in aligning with the Senate. So there will be a series of motions near the end where we'll be combining the bills, and but we'll also be reporting the bills out separately as well. So just kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. The first bill on the agenda is Representative Schultz. That's the PCA bill. Representative Schultz.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Carlson.
Okay, and then if Representative Olson, would you care to make a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move the Health and Human Service Finance Bill for House File 168.
Okay, the motion is before us, and any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carried. There is an amendment. Representative Olson.
Mr. Chair, I move the A8 amendment.
Okay, the motion is before us. And Representative Schultz, would you care to comment on the amendment?
Thank you, Chair Carlson. The amendment appropriates dollars in specific years, and it adds language to make sure that we use federal money from the CARES Act, if possible, if this qualifies, rather than the general fund.
Okay, any discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I think members, Representative Olson, I believe, moved the division report, but did not move the bill. So we need to get the bill before you.
Oh, okay. Representative Olson.
So I move that House File 168 as amended be recommended to be placed on the general register.
Okay, the motion is before us. And Representative Schultz. Any discussion?
Chair Carlson, to the bill?
On the bill.
The bill, yes, thank you, Chair Carlson and members. The bill is a long overdue rate increase to personal care assistance, and it's a temporary increase during the public health emergency of 15%, and up to 80% of that rate increase will go to wages and benefits. And then the bill does two other things. There's a permanent change to the maximum number of hours that PCAs can work from 275 to 310. And then the third change, it allows spouses and parents of minors to be paid to care for their loved ones who are receiving PCA services. And there is a fiscal note, and I'll briefly talk about that fiscal note. The allowing spouses and parents of minors to be paid is about $150,000. The increase of the cap on the number of hours per month is about $1 to $1.5 million. And the temporary 15% rate increase is the largest, and that's around $25 million. And then Representative Lippard has been instrumental in crafting permanent rate change bill that's not moving forward, but has been working with Senator Ralph on this temporary increase. So I'd like to have him discuss the importance of this bill and the urgency.
Okay, and I got a bit out of sequence there when I forgot to adopt the report. We do have to adopt the amendment. So Representative Schultz, maybe if you could comment a bit on the amendment, and then we'll adopt that. And then you've already commented on the bill. I got a little out of sequence there. Any discussion on the amendment?
Thank you, Chair Carlson. Like I said earlier, the amendment just appropriates dollars in the specific years and then make sure that we use federal funds through the CARES Act if this is eligible to use those funds.
And I just wanted to make sure people know what we're voting on then. Okay, so we're voting on the amendment now. Any further discussion on the amendment? Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the author of the amendment mentioned covering the fiscal note. I just want to restate that the amendment does not materially alter the fiscal note that we are going to be reviewing after adoption of the amendment.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I shouldn't answer for Representative Schultz. Representative Schultz, is that correct?
This is correct.
Okay, any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Representative Schultz, you already covered the bill. Any further comments?
Yes, I would like Representative Lippert to make some comments as well. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Lippert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So just very quickly provide some context. So this bill is just seeking to ensure that people with disabilities and older adults can access the care they need, and it seeks to provide greater economic security to low-paid but essential care workers in our state. There are 44,000 people with disabilities and older adults who rely on PCA services, and roughly 200,000 PCAs. There was a shortage of PCAs before COVID-19, and there's an even greater shortage now. As college students who were PCAs have gone home, PCAs often work multiple jobs. There are other employers who don't want them taking this risk in healthcare. So this bill seeks to stabilize the workforce, allow us to recruit more PCAs by providing a temporary rate increase, and it provides greater economic security to PCAs. The one final thing I would say is that this is where the state gets the most value in its dollars related to services for people with older adults when it's providing home care services. If the alternative to these dollars and this care is for people who are receiving PCA services to go into the nursing home, which is much, much more expensive care, and it's much more expensive for the state. So these dollars are high value dollars for the state when we're thinking about care services. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Lippert, you mentioned the temporary nature of this. Can you elaborate on when the deadline or how long this will be in place for?
Representative Lippert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Garofalo. So it's a temporary rate increase. It ends in February 2021, or 60 days after the end of the peacetime emergency.
Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm reading the fiscal note here, Representative Lippert, and it says the latest date that this temporary change could be in effect is January 31st, 2021. So in the event that the peacetime emergency ends, which takes priority? The deadline of the peacetime emergency ending or the January 31st, 2021?
Representative Lippert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Garofalo. Chair Schultz can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the end of the peacetime emergency takes precedence.
And Mr. Chairman, I don't want to call on Representative Schultz. I'll let you do that.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Chair Carlson and Representative Garofalo. So I agree with Lippert, but the fiscal note is estimated based on when this is implemented at the federal level, when we get the waiver, and they assume a June 15th start date and an end in August 29th of 2020. for the temporary rate increase. That's how the fiscal note was structured. Those are the assumptions they made on the cost.
And Mr. Chairman, and again, for members who are, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for members who are reading, so I'm looking at page 11 of the fiscal note, and it's under the section long-term fiscal considerations. And under section 4, the assumption that they're putting into effect here is that we are going to be, and I want to make sure that I'm reading this right, that we are going to be in a peacetime emergency until June 30th. So for either Representative Schultz or Representative Lippert, am I reading that section of the fiscal note correct?
Representative Schultz.
You are, and it's, if anything beyond that, I think the cost is $10 million per month in addition if we go beyond that date.
Mr. Chairman, and so thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Schultz or Lippert, whoever wishes to answer it, just to make sure members of the committee understand, and I want to make sure I understand this correctly, that the fiscal note in question assumes that the peacetime emergency is going to go till June 30th, and that the payments at this higher level will go out until the end of August, and that's what the fiscal note is based on. That assumption. Is that correct?
Correct. Chair.
Okay, thank you. And so, Mr. Chairman, and either Representative Lippert or Representative Schultz, so do you have any concerns or issues with the possibility that we would be in a peacetime emergency until it is assumed that we are going to be in a peacetime emergency with the governor's unilateral ability to create temporary law through June 30th? Am I the only one who has a concern with that?
It's sort of a rhetorical question, Representative Garofalo. I don't know if you're looking for a specific answer.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll try again. So either Representative Schultz or Representative Lippert, do you have any concerns with that assumption that the governor's going to have the special power all the way through June 30th?
Chair Carlson.
Mr. Carlson.
At a time, Representative, I'll start with Representative Schultz. I think I heard her voice first.
Chair Carlson, Representative Garofalo, you have to make some sort of assumptions when you're putting these fiscal notes together. And that's the assumption the fiscal analysts used.
Representative Lippert, did you have anything to add?
I don't. I think, what Chair Schultz said is right. That's the assumption for the fiscal note, and exactly when the peacetime emergency ends is a separate conversation.
So, Mr. Chairman, and I'll just, rather than making two people answer it, I'll just ask my friend, Representative Schultz. Representative Schultz, do you personally have a concern with the peacetime emergency and these executive powers being extended until June 30th?
Chair Carlson and Representative Garofalo, I don't think that's relevant. We can talk offline, Representative Garofalo.
Okay.
I think that Representative Garofalo, a little different direction in terms of speculating about when that or whether people have concerns about it or not. That sounds like a debate for another forum. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would respectfully disagree with both Representative Schultz and yourself, Mr. Chairman. It's incredibly relevant to the conversation we're having right now. The fiscal note is assuming that this ends on June 30th. The longer the governor decides that he has this emergency authority, the greater the fiscal note cost will be. So it's very much related to it. In fact, if we were to put in different language to this bill, requiring a harder set and making that appropriation no longer contingent on the governor's emergency authority, it'd be very relevant to the conversation. So if members do not have concerns about this executive authority being extended, or if a majority of the House of Representatives doesn't have a concern about it, then there's no sense in me having a conversation about it. If, however, other members do share my concern about one person having the ability to write laws, we're in the 7th week of this right now, and we're seeing a projection through the end of June. I think it's very relevant to the conversation. And absent answers from members of the committee and the author deferring answers to these questions to a later date, we're left to reach our own conclusions about how this is going to be addressed. So I do think it's relevant, and I would like an answer to my question.
Yeah, Representative Groffalo, what I was referring to is you were asking if they had a concern, and that seemed to me to be going in a little different direction. If you want to ask more specifically about when this particular bill would end, or how that would work, I think that would be relevant. Representative Schultz.
So I think that, even without this pandemic and crisis, we were bringing forward legislation to improve the rates because their PCAs are paid so low wages. And the unemployment insurance is actually higher than the wages they receive currently. So this is a problem, and we really should permanently increase their wages. They're doing hard work that's vital to the lives of thousands of people in Minnesota. And this is an issue, and it's been an issue for a long time. So we really should find funds to permanently increase these rates.
And
Representative Groffalo.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Schultz, currently as the bill is drafted, this would use the federal COVID relief, or it would ask the commissioner to determine if the COVID relief funds are eligible for the funding this. In the event that they were unavailable, we would use the general fund. Am I stating that? Do I understand the bill correctly?
That is correct, Representative Groffalo.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're very welcome. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is to the author and whether or not she's had conversations with someone at the federal level as to whether these expenditures would be covered by the CARES Act. And I just wanted to clarify that what the author just said was that if they are not eligible for CARES Act dollars, that the bill will move forward in this process using general fund dollars. So kind of two questions in one.
Okay, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Chair Carlson and Representative Scott. So yes, if it didn't qualify, we would use general fund dollars. But my sense from reading the language of the $1.87 billion that the state has received, it would fall under medical care, health care, payroll compensation. So from my understanding of the language we have received so far, that this has a very, very high probability of qualifying for the federal funds.
Representative Schultz. Or Scott.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And this question might be for Mr. Marks. I'm wondering if someone, maybe himself, is someone keeping track of all of the bills that we're offering that would be paid for through these federal dollars? And is there a running account of that somewhere?
Mr. Marks.
Mr. Chair and Representative Scott, at this point, it's the bills today that we're looking at that are would be directing there. There are others, portions of the 500 million, roughly 500 million that's already been appropriated that we think are eligible for it as well. So the problem is we're not sure on a number of these things yet.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Mr. Chair.
Representative Scott.
Yeah, I have grave concerns. Mr. Chair, this question's for you. So are all the bills that we're hearing today, if they don't qualify for this federal CARES Act money, are all of them then going to be paid for supposedly with general fund dollars?
That's a possibility. I think some of the bills, the answer to that currently is probably a little bit clear that they would qualify for federal funds. Others, we are going to have to get more information. That's why the language is drafted the way it is. For example, it appears to be fairly clear that when we get to the broadband question, that that would qualify for federal funds. But we've been just getting the guidelines and interpreting the guidelines from the federal government in just recent days. That's why we have the language that we do, that if they qualify for federal funds, that's what will be used. And if they do not, we're placing a high enough priority where then it would be federal or state dollars that would be utilized. If that answers your question, Representative Scott.
Somewhat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Will qualify. It appears there's a fair amount of those federal dollars. Some of us, including Representative Garofalo, were on a call last night where they were going over much of this, and it appears that there's a fairly large block of dollars where we'll have a fair amount of discretion in the use. But the answer to that question will become clearer in the next few days. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, and maybe this goes back to the bill's author, but does it, in the guidance that we've gotten from the federal government, does it say that funds can be used to solve alleged inequities in such things as PCA pay?
Representative Schultz.
I don't think the guidelines are that specific, Chair Carlson, Representative Scott, but we are, the issue that why this has to happen now is because people who are getting services from PCAs, individuals who need those services to live and to survive, are much higher risk during this pandemic, during this crisis. And that's why we need to make sure that we increase the rates, and we also set aside some of this funds in the bill language so they can purchase PPE and the chemicals they need to do disinfectant to keep the individuals safe who are receiving these services.
Mr. Chair?
Representative Scott.
Thank you. And this will just be a final comment, but I don't think anybody's arguing that these PCAs deserve a raise. There's no question about it. These people do really, really hard and difficult work. And I would love to give this to them. I'm concerned about how to pay for it. And if we don't get the federal dollars to do so, I don't know where the money's going to come from in our own state budget. So again, PCA is very worthy. No question. Everyone on this call would agree with that. But this question mark of whether it's going to be paid for with federal dollars or not, and it looks like maybe under this bill that might be the case, that that they would be. I just have concerns about how we would ever pay for it out of our state budget if the federal dollars are unable to be used. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're very welcome, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I just want to kind of go back to what Representative Lippert mentioned at the beginning and give members, remind members of a little perspective here. So first of all, well, let me start by saying that there is a match here, that this is matched by federal dollars. So the statement that this is all general fund isn't exactly true, and maybe Mr. Marks or Mr. Berg, who's on the call, could speak to that. But that's the first thing I wanted to clarify. But secondly, as Representative Lippert said, these are people who, if they didn't get this at-home care, would otherwise have to be in a nursing home. And if those of you who've ever been on Health and Human Services may know that nursing home care is extremely expensive, and that also comes out of our state budget. So let's just think about who we're talking about here. We're talking about some people who literally cannot get out of bed, cannot eat, cannot move around, cannot get dressed unless they have these PCA services. So when I hear members talking about, oh, we shouldn't do this, we can't do this because it's going to cost money. It seems to me it's a difference between saying, I have $5, but I'm not going to buy food today. I'm going to starve because next month I might need the $5. These are people who need this care and they need it today to survive. So let's just keep that in perspective. We cannot fail to support people who have these kinds of urgent needs to get through the crisis. And I feel pretty confident that we'll have those federal dollars to help us do it. But if we don't, we still have a moral responsibility as a state to take care of this, unless we want to just say, let's abandon our seniors, let's abandon our most vulnerable people. And I don't think any of us want to do that. So I would say this is a very good bill. It's limited. We were going to try to move forward just raises for this category of worker because they are underpaid. And we need to keep people doing this work. So if members want to vote against this, just be really conscious about what you're voting against. You're voting to let people who are the most vulnerable that we have, who we are saving money, these PCAs are saving us money by taking care of these folks at home. And if they're not able to do that, the costs are going to be much, much greater unless you want to just say, let's abandon these Minnesotans. And I don't think anybody wants to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Representative Albright. Representative Albright.
Yes, thank you, Chair Carlson. I think Representative Scott reiterated what everyone on this committee has always been mindful of. There's no one on this committee that doesn't think that PCAs are deserving of compensation for the services provided. But I do find it concerning to me when the GOP caucus to the Ways and Means Committee asks questions relevant to how are we going to pay for this? And the rebuke comes back to us as, how dare you think on those terms when all we're trying to do is take care of the people that are taking care of the most vulnerable amongst us. I find it concerning that this committee, who is charged with the dollars and cents of the budget, takes offense when members are asking basic questions about where the funding is going to come from and whether or not the veracity of the answers is reputable. To suggest in any way, shape, or form that we don't have any concern for those most vulnerable amongst us is offensive to me. All we're asking for is to find out legitimate answers to where the money is going to come from and whether or not we can rely upon the source itself. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Any further discussion? Well, seeing none, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Chair. I renew my motion that House File 168 as amended be recommended to be placed on the general register.
And members, that will need to be, being its passage, a roll call vote. So any further discussion? Seeing none, then we'll take the roll.
Representative Carlson?
Aye.
Representative Olson?
Aye.
Representative Garofalo?
No.
Representative Albright?
No.
Representative Bernardi?
Aye.
Representative Davids? Representative Davney?
Aye.
Representative Driscowski?
No.
Representative Eklund?
Aye.
Representative Hamilton?
No.
Representative Hansen?
Aye.
Representative Hausman?
Aye.
Representative Hertas? Representative Hornstein?
Aye.
Representative Kresha?
No.
Representative Liebling?
Aye.
Representative Lilly?
Aye.
Representative Long?
Aye.
Representative Mariani?
Yes.
Representative Marquardt,
Aye.
Representative Nelson,
Aye.
Representative Neuer,
Yes.
Representative Pulowski, Representative Poppy,
Yes.
Representative Schumacher, Representative Scott,
No.
Representative Torkelson,
No.
Representative Vogel excused, Representative Wagenius.
Yes.
Okay, before we announce the vote, Ms. Bartman, would you go back and double check with anybody that didn't respond yet?
Representative Davids,
No.
Representative Hertas,
I was muted before, but no.
Representative Pulowski,
Aye.
Representative Schumacher. Uh, 18 ayes, 9 nays.
Okay, motion carried, and the bill will be placed on general orders. The next bill up is Representative Hausman's bill dealing with housing mortgage foreclosures and eviction notices. Representative Hausman, would you care to make a motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House File 4541, the first engrossment, be recommended to be placed on the general register.
Okay,
I also have an amendment, and I don't know if you want me to explain the bill first or.
That's your choice. You want to put it in the order that you'd like to present it, you probably should put the amendment on.
All right. I move the A2 amendment. This is kind of repeats the conversation of the previous bill. We're still getting clarity on how and whether federal dollars can be used from the CARES Act, but this amendment puts it in the perspective that we can perhaps use that as we get clarity on it.
Okay, Representative Hausman moves the A2 amendment. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, then all those in favor, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure we're taking up the A2 amendment right now.
That's right. I indicated that the author of the bill could put it in the order she wanted to present it. So we're taking the amendment first, and then she'll present the bill as amended.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to the amendment, Representative Hausman, can you just clarify this language on Section 5, particularly line 13?
The technical things being what they are, I have to click on. The fiscal staff drafted this, and I think they're on the line. Perhaps they could
Mr. Marks is working on that. Representative Hausman, would you like us to defer to Mr. Marks?
Or the fiscal analyst for the housing committee, whichever.
Okay, either one. Yeah. I mentioned Mr. Marks. I'd worked with him, but whoever wants to, whichever the fiscal staff wants to respond.
Mr. Chair, this is Bill Marks. The Section 5 is basically saying the commissioner of MMB must make a determination if this expenditure is eligible under the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Relief Aid account there. And then if it is, the money is appropriated from that rather than the general fund, and the general fund appropriation is canceled.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman and Mr. Marks, in the absence of a determination by the Commissioner of Management and Budget, does the appropriation not go forward, or does it come from the general fund?
Mr. Marks.
Mr. Chair, Representative Garofalo, it would come from the general fund in that case.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman and Representative, I just about demoted you, Mr. Marks. I almost made you a representative there. My apologies. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Marks, in the event that the funds appropriated to the state of Minnesota under the federal law designated, if those funds were exhausted in advance of a determination from the commissioner, what would be the course of action for that funding in that situation?
Mr. Marks?
Mr. Chair and Representative Garofalo, this language basically says that if it is eligible, it is appropriated from that fund. That may be a discussion that's needed to occur yet as this language evolves, that if there's more appropriated than what's available. But at this point, if it's eligible, then it needs to come from the CARES Act fund.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll defer to you on this, but would it be appropriate for us to just at a high level overview what the resources are that are available under this federal funds and how much of it we have committed to appropriated from it? Not an overall view of the program, but just for members to understand. And I know you understand this from the call last night, Mr. Chairman. But
for home and community applicants, personal care attendants, they just voted no.
Why?
There is some feedback there. You might want to let Pawlowski know he's live. Actually, last night, Representative Garofalo, as we were going through that information that was presented to some of us by MMB, I was thinking that probably would be a good idea once they have a little more information to have a hearing on that. Wednesday, we will be having a hearing on where we stand with the state budget as a result of the update. Now, we'll probably all know pretty much about that by the time we have the hearing, because they're going to release it publicly on Tuesday. But it'll be a chance for Ways and Means members to do a follow-up and ask some questions. But I think we probably will look carefully at doing somewhat the same thing. As you know, the questions that were asked last night, often MMB said that they needed more information before they could give us firm responses. So I think once they're ready, that would be a good idea. So thank you for the suggestion, Representative Garofalo.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify, or you have to unmute, voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Representative Hausman on the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The governor's executive order at the time that he called for a moratorium on evictions didn't forgive the debt. And the workers affected by layoffs were workers from restaurants, bars, retail. We know their hourly salary. They are likely a group of people who are one paycheck away from not being able to pay their bills, and that includes rent and utilities and so many other things. The governor was concerned that we not add to our homelessness issue at the time of the healthcare crisis, and so that was one of his motivations, I think. You've heard a little bit of the complexity of the federal action. The CARES Act took some action on the same issue, and so we're still working that through. The $100 million goes through an existing program, FHPAP, the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program in Minnesota Housing. The advantage of that is it's an existing program, it's already set up, and so it can very quickly move to resolve some of these issues. The money goes directly to landlords. It is that amount, 100 million, has broad support across the state and among groups. Homes for All, MICA, Minnesota Multi-Housing, Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, Isaiah, many groups have come together. They understand the challenge. Landlords have already begun to tell us what happened on April 1st, and today is May 1st, and we've got one more level of concern there. Minnesota Housing Partnership did some work on the need, and I'm going to speak specifically to more recent. We know what's happened in April, but that $100 million provides assistance to those who are struggling to make rent, mortgage, and utility payments, and it ensures our housing system has sufficient rental income to remain open. Here are just some of the impacts. Even before this crisis, many of these workers were paying too much for rent. In the last 2 weeks, United Way reports a staggering increase in calls for assistance. Three Rivers Community Action spent this quarter's allocation in the first 2 weeks of April. That's how fast the money went. 72% of the applicants had lost income due to COVID. Greater Minnesota Housing Fund reports that their rental income declined by 16% in April. Project for Pride in Living estimates that their loss to their budget will be $3 to $5 million. Aon, who is another large provider of affordable housing, have a 10% loss in rental income in April. In Greater Minnesota, the majority of FHPAP payments go to smaller landlords, and those owners of those properties are completely dependent on rental income to make mortgage, utility, property tax, and insurance payments. We know that almost 600,000 people have applied for unemployment at this point. So the need is great, and there is huge support across the state and across all of the stakeholders in this bill and the 100 million housing assistance.
Okay, any discussion? Let's see, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Hausman, Chair Hausman, for this bill. I do have a couple of questions. I know most people know that we own some rental property, and we have a person that rents from us, and she is she's a waitress, and of course very concerned about being able to pay her rent. And she now, with her unemployment at the state level and the $600 per month that the federal government is providing, is doing just fine. And so one of my questions is there means testing in this language so that someone has to actually prove that they have a need, that they haven't had adequate income to meet their household needs?
Yes, Ryan Baumtraub is on the call, and there are existing guidelines under the FHPAP program that I've heard him speak to that does just exactly what you asked. And if he's on the line, perhaps he could describe that to us.
Is he on the line?
That was my understanding.
Representative Carlson, can you hear me?
If you could identify yourself for the record.
Yeah, certainly. Chair Carlson, I'm Ryan Baumtraub, Assistant Commissioner for Policy at Minnesota Housing.
Did you hear the question?
I certainly did. Thanks for the question, Representative Scott. The program currently works in that an individual goes to a provider and they have to show that they have a housing crisis, show that they meet the income threshold. So there's documentation and things that are required that would show that the individual or family does not have the ability to pay the bills in order to be eligible for the program. And then if they are eligible for the program, the payments are made directly to either the landlord, or if it's for mortgage assistance, directly to where that mortgage is serviced.
And Mr. Baumtraub, I believe you also asked whether there's are other forms of income that could help, as I recall.
Yes, Chair Carlson, Representative Hausman, that's correct. So our providers also do utilize the program to connect those that might not be eligible for this program, but other programs. They try to connect the household and individuals to other resources as well, should they be eligible for those programs.
Representative.
No.
Did you call on me? I'm sorry. You were breaking up there.
Oh, they were responding to your question. I said, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can you kind of give us an inside look, and this might be to Mr. Baumtraub, I can't see the rest of his name. I don't know if I have that right. Could you respond to what you're seeing out there? Because as I said, with the with the state and federal dollars, state unemployment and the federal $600 a month, who are the people that aren't able to pay their rent right now that were able to in January and February? And some of those folks, I'm assuming, were on Section 8 and other things, which hasn't gone away. So if you could elaborate on who these people are that are unable to pay their rent right now.
Was that directed at Mr. Hyde?
Yes, the person from the
Minnesota Housing.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Representative Scott, I'll take a crack at it and can also follow up with you offline. You know, prior to the pandemic, we knew that there were about 140,000 households that were already paying more than 50% of their income in rent. This was a pretty fragile situation with the lack of rental assistance prior to the pandemic. To the point you raise about unemployment insurance and other resources, again, because it's on an individual and family basis, if they have more resources now, one, I don't think they'll be reaching out for their bills to be paid. But if they have more resources, albeit somewhat temporary through July for the extended unemployment insurance benefits, they would not be eligible for the program. We are seeing significant demands through our program currently. Our providers, we have 20 providers across the state that serve all 87 counties. Those providers are running out of their emergency rental assistance in the first week or two of each month and are asking us to go into future resources to pay the current demand that they are seeing right now. And so that's what these resources would be used for. Did that answer your question, Representative Scott?
Mr. Chair.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it did somewhat. So if I understand what you said, there were 140,000 households that were struggling to pay their rent, or they had 50% of their housing costs, in January and February of this year. It was already a problem. So my question then is to Representative Chair Hausman, if we're unable to, well, first of all, is this funding, the $100 million, is that something that we're seeking out of the Federal CARES Act as well?
The amendment we just added suggests that. That's because it's a work in progress. We're still working through, as you heard in the discussion from the previous bill, and that we'll get some more information next week, I think, when Myron Franz comes before the committee.
So, Mr. Chair.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Chair Hausman, so was there already going to be, what was going to be the request, had we not had this COVID epidemic, what was going to be the request for dollars out of your committee, if you have a round number that you were thinking of asking for prior to the COVID pandemic?
Prior to, we would have made no request. This is strictly in response to what has happened since March.
Well, Mr. Chair.
Representative Scott.
Thank you for that. Well, I'm confused because the testifier from Minnesota Housing just said that there were all these people struggling prior to the COVID pandemic, and made it sound like there was going to be funding available for those people prior to this pandemic. And that gives me concern because my understanding of the federal guidelines, and I know they're fairly vague at this point, but they don't allow you to use the money for something that is just filling in a budget need that the state may or may not have, or a budget shortfall. And it seems like from what the testifier said, some of that money would be going to meet the needs of those people that were struggling prior to the COVID pandemic. So that's all that I have, Mr. Chair.
So Mr. Chair, the FHPAP program is an existing program, and so that would have been funded as part of their regular budget cycle. We could have him speak to what was in last year's budget, but if you want to pursue that.
Mr. Chair, sure, sure.
If Mr. Baumtrag is still there, what she's asking about, the FHPAP program is an ongoing program in your department. And so in our regular budget cycle, I don't know if you've got a dollar amount from last year or how that's funded on an ongoing basis.
Yes, Chair Carlson and Representative Scott, we get roughly about $20 million for the program statewide. The program has a number of uses. This bill looks particularly at the homeless prevention side of the program. It's also used for those experiencing homelessness. So the bill in front of you today is really about a part of the family homelessness prevention and assistance program that's prescribed in this bill. I should say, there was a question earlier about previous funding in the CARES Act. There is some resources in the federal CARES Act for rental assistance, but our understanding from HUD, the Housing and Urban Development federal agency, is that those are specific for existing contracts that are in place, given that tenants pay 30% of their income in rent, and that many of those tenants have seen a decrease in income. And so the resources that so far have been allocated by the federal government are almost exclusively to make those existing contracts whole. So there aren't new rental assistance resources available. And then to the program overall, the program at its current funding level serves about 10% of those eligible for the program, for the range of services from emergency mortgage, rental assistance, all the way to homeless prevention and other uses of the program. So it's a very in-demand program because of the number of people experiencing homelessness and those that are one paycheck away from experiencing homelessness.
I might just comment, as both Representative Garofalo and I have pointed out, there was a meeting online last night for some of us about the federal funding, and we'll be talking more about that in the days ahead. But just some of the areas that are identified for some of the federal funding, homeless assistance grants, local homeless assistance grants, state, there's blocks of dollars for both. Public housing operating, tenant-based rental assistance, and housing opportunities for persons with AIDS. Those were some of the broad categories that are identified, and we're still going to have to sort through what the specific guidelines are. But it appears that there is federal funds available in the housing area for a variety of different issues. And Representative Hausman probably knows more about that than I do, but I just thought I would mention that was just from a listing that I just happened to have here at the desk. But Representative Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for that information to the testifier and to Chair Hausman. So my final question would be, how did you arrive at the $100 million? Because I believe the Senate has come down to 30 million. And I guess it's a two-part question, so I guess I lied there. But so the second part of the question is, if this isn't covered by federal funds, will this be a $100 million state budget expenditure?
Representative
Yes,
Hausman.
the Minnesota Housing Partnership is an organization that did a really extensive work on quantifying this. And so it was partly through their work that we came up with that 100 million. I think most people who are beginning to see the impact feel that we're probably being conservative in our amount, that it could be more than that, but it's what we're seeking right now. But the good work of the Minnesota Housing Partnership is where we got that. And then landlords are now beginning to report to us the level of impact on them.
So, Mr. Chair.
Representative Scott.
Thank you. So, Representative Hausman, my second part of that question was, if the federal funds don't cover this, will this be a state budget expenditure?
It is a state budget expenditure, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Hausman, Is there any audit function in your bill to address not the means test, but the appropriateness of distribution and disbursement of these funds?
Again, Mr. Baumgart could speak to that because it does go through this existing program, the FHPAP program. And I'm assuming that they are subject to audit as any other part of the state budget. Mr. Baumgart.
Representative Carlson and Representative Albright, a couple of things I'll just mention. One is that the language does have some specific reporting requirements on these resources in terms of who they served, where they went, how they were distributed. We also, as the funder, work with our grantees and do quarterly reviews of spending already and verification of documentation and case files. And then Representative Hausman is correct that programs of Minnesota Housing are subject to OLA oversight and review.
Representative Scott. Or,
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Baumtrog, Representative Hausman alluded to an assessment or analysis in terms of appropriate funding levels, and there seems to be some disparity between what the House has arrived at and what the Senate is, and certainly one could suggest that that's the body politic. But she alluded to the fact that you have a model that you prepared that would identify with the correct funding, at least through some time period. I'm wondering if you could relay that information to the committee members.
Mr. Chair and Representative Albright, it was the Minnesota Housing Partnership. That's an advocacy group that did the work on this, not the department.
Representative Hausman and Chair Carlson and Representative Albright, we are putting together estimates, ongoing estimates, based on information that we're receiving from Multi-Housing Association and their non-payment of rents for April that have increased by about 5%, and can do some estimates that show that around 100 million will get about 3 months of assistance is our current estimate. And that is just for rental assistance. The bill has several other uses related to mortgage assistance, bought rents for manufactured homes, contract for deeds. So just for one of the eligible uses, we're estimating it's about 3 months of rental assistance. And that's with some evolving information from the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association.
Mr. Chair, my final question for Representative Hausman. I would presume, and you can nod on this one rather than respond, but this is a one-time appropriation as opposed to in addition to baseline funding.
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the question about who folks are who are struggling with rental payments at this time, I'm sure all of us have heard from constituents who are struggling at this point in time. Certainly, I've heard from many who had steady jobs until very recently because of the difficulties posed by the current pandemic we're in, and are now facing real needs to be able to make their monthly payments. My question for Representative Hausman, you mentioned the housing advocacy groups are supporting $100 million. I'm curious, what amount are the landlords, the multi-housing association requesting for support in this regard?
They also support the 100 million. They've been strong supporters of that as well.
So that seems pretty unique to me, Mr. Chair and Representative Hausman, that two organizations that don't always see eye to eye on everything are coming together and calling for support in this time to make sure that we're both allowing folks to stay in their homes when we know that that's necessary to keep them safe and to keep other Minnesotans safe, and also to keep landlords whole in this difficult time. So it seems like a pretty unique coalition to me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion? Well, seeing none, Representative Hausman, would you care to renew your motion?
I will renew my motion that House File 4541, the first engrossment as amended, be recommended to be placed on the general register.
Okay, the motion is before us. Any further discussion? We will need to do a roll call on this one, so we'll need have Ms. Sparkman call the roll when she's ready. Ms. Sparkman?
Representative Carlson,
Aye.
Representative Olson,
Aye.
Representative Garofalo,
No.
Representative Albright,
No.
Representative Bernardi,
Aye.
Representative Davids,
No.
Representative Dabney,
Aye.
Representative Drazkowski,
No.
Representative Eklund,
Aye.
Representative Hamilton,
No.
Representative Hansen,
Aye.
Representative Hausman,
Aye.
Representative Hertaus,
No.
Representative Hornstein,
Aye.
Representative Kresha,
No.
Representative Liebling,
Aye.
Representative Lilly,
Aye.
Representative Long,
Aye.
Representative Mariani,
Aye.
Representative Marquardt, Representative Nelson,
Aye.
Representative Noor,
Aye.
Representative Pulowski,
Aye.
Representative Poppy,
Aye.
Representative Schumacher excused, Representative Scott,
No.
Representative Torkelson,
No.
Representative Vogel excused, Representative Wagenius.
Aye.
Okay, and if you could call the names of those that didn't respond.
We have all responses.
Oh, we have, okay. I didn't hear David's responded, then I thought he didn't, but
He did, just, yep.
okay.
So it's 18 ayes, 9 nays.
Okay, the motion passed and it's on its way to general orders. So thank you, Representative.
Thank you, members.
The next bill up is by Representative Stephenson. This deals with the Minnesota Investment Fund, and we will be having a significant amendment to the bill as we move forward. But Representative Stephenson, are you present?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, welcome to the committee. We'll begin with a motion by Representative Olson.
Mr. Chair, I move the Jobs and Economic Development Finance Division report for House File 1507.
Okay, that motion is before us. Any discussion? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We have another motion by Representative Olson. Representative Olson.
Mr. Chair, I move House File 1507 as amended be recommended to be placed on the general register.
Okay, that motion is before us. And we now have an amendment, the H1 507 DE4 amendment. Representative Olson.
Mr. Chair, I move the H1 507 DE4 amendment.
Okay, and Representative Stephenson, would you care to explain the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I know it's unusual to have a DE amendment in this committee. The reason for that is the amendment actually only makes two relatively small changes, but one of the changes resulted in a dramatic renumbering. And so nonpartisan staff decided it would be easier to format as a DE. The first change just clarifies that the funding source will be CARES Act money. The initial bill sort of had an alternate funding source that if CARES Act money was available by May 15th, it would be CARES Act money. Otherwise, it would be general fund money. And this clarifies it will be CARES Act money. The second change relates to who would be eligible to receive a emergency loan under the bill. And this is language that we discussed in the Jobs Committee, but unfortunately didn't have an amendment prepared in time for the Jobs Committee. And there was pretty broad support for the change, expanding the scope of the loans.
Okay, any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Representative Olson?
There's another amendment. Do you want me to move the H1507A8 amendment? The A8?
Representative Stephenson, would you care to explain your bill first, and then we can go to that amendment?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. House File 1507 provides $55 million in partially to fully forgivable loans to Minnesota small businesses. Of that sum, $5 million is transferred from the loan guarantee program that the legislature created several weeks ago. The loan guarantee program hasn't really been as successful as we'd hoped, and I think the money could be used better used in the emergency loan program. The remaining funding comes from Minnesota's share of the federal aid passed to the CARES Act. The intent of the bill is to provide funding for businesses that have been unable to obtain relief in the state and federal relief packages to date. Accordingly, the bill reserves funds for the smallest of the small businesses with less than 6 employees, as well as minority-owned businesses with 7 to 20 employees. Last, the bill contains 2 policy provisions that are designed to help vulnerable Minnesotans obtain relief and survive the crisis. Particularly, the bill adds some protections relating to PPP loans and relaxes some requirements.
Okay, any discussion on the bill? Then we'll take up the next amendment. Representative Olson. Oh, excuse me, somebody, I don't see a hand up.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to ask if we could maybe take the amendments up, then we could discuss the bill on final passage, as opposed to vice versa.
We can do that. We've got a fairly major amendment coming up, but that's why I was asking him to explain the amendment and get the Stephenson part of it done, and then we'll be taking a major amendment after that. But I think we can dispose of the amendments with the Stephenson part of the bill, and then we'll have to have some separate discussion on, I think, that major amendment that deals with broadband. So, Representative Olson.
Mr. Chair, so at this point, do you want me to move the A8?
Yeah.
Okay, so I move the A8 amendment to the H1507A8 amendment.
Okay, that motion is before us. Any discussion? Seeing none, then all those opposed or all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried.
Come on. Come.
I hear somebody. I'm sorry I could hear a voice, but I'm not sure what it was. There wasn't a hand up anyway. Okay, Representative Olson.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I believe we're now going to move the language that was contained in the DE4 amendment as amended to be included as Article 1 of the COVID-19 Economic Security Package. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's my motion.
Okay, that motion is before us. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, what motion are we on now?
We're on the motion, the DE4 amendment.
And this includes the A8 amendment?
To be included in Article 1.
So this is the DE4 amendment, including the A8 amendment that was just enacted?
That's the motion that's before us, yeah.
Okay, so there's been no other amendments to 1507 besides the DE4 and the A8 amendment?
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Now we go down to the next part of the bill, which is the broadband. And Representative Eklund. Is he here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I would like to move the H1507A10 amendment. And Mr. Chair, in that I would like to offer an oral amendment also.
Okay. Why don't you offer or I assume the oral amendment is getting the bill in the order that you would like.
Yes, Mr. Chair, on line 5.18 of the A10 amendment, Mr. Marks would be able to comment on this, but we would need to remove, after this is a one-time appropriation, we would need to remove no money in the appropriation may be spent until the Commissioner of Management and Budget determines that the appropriation in this paragraph is an eligible use for the coronavirus relief account in the federal fund. And I believe Mr. Marks can comment on that.
This was one that came in as a result of the review by nonpartisan staff of the bill. Mr. Marks? I think that's the history. We are on mute.
Mr. Chair, this is just clarifying that the money could come from the general fund. The language, the way it was written in here, would basically never have a general fund appropriation because it says that the money had to, that the general fund appropriation wasn't effective unless the commissioner determined that it could be used that the money could come from the CARES fund, and then the next section said the CARES fund had to be used. So striking that one sentence, it leaves this in the same format as the other ones, that it's general fund, but if it can be CARES fund, then that's what will be used.
Okay, any discussion on the oral amendment? Okay, seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. The next amendment
Mr. Chair.
by Representative Eklund, but do you want to explain the bill first, or do you want to take up the additional amendments?
Mr. Chair, this is Nancy.
Yes.
I think you missed a motion. I think you were going to give the members an opportunity to vote on the small business loan section as a separate Article 1 of this bill.
That's right. We talked about that. That was a question that was raised last year. Minority wanted to make sure they had an opportunity to vote on each section with the multiple components of the bill. Okay, so we will want to do that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Yeah, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to use the raise my hand feature without just interrupting. I'm sorry, but I
wasn't sure if that was you at first, Representative Garofalo. Okay, Representative Garofalo. You've been raising your hand before.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, I mean, I want the opportunity to vote on these things, but you can understand on the housing side, the housing assistance side, or excuse me, on the small business grant side of things, we have policy provisions that are attached to this that have nothing to do with it. So my caucus wants no part to do with those things. So whether we vote on it or not is irrelevant. We're trying to be accommodating with this process, right? We understand this is a difficult time for everyone, you know, having us all connect via video conference. We don't want to be here unnecessarily long, but you can understand from our side of things that it's pretty difficult to see what's going on right now. So whatever you need to do to get these bills into one giant bill, just go ahead and do it. Let's just allow us an opportunity to know what's going on. Thanks.
Well, thank you for that input. We were, Ms. Conley and I were trying to be accommodating to the discussion that we had last year. I think it may have been Representative Hamilton, but I'm not positive of that expressed concern when we were putting a bill together that there was a provision that we hadn't voted upon separately, even though we voted on the overall bill. So that's what we were attempting to do here. But why don't we proceed, Representative Olson or Representative Eklund?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this explain the bill overall is what you're looking for now, Mr. Chairman.
I think the minority lead expressed an interest that he didn't need to vote on the Stephenson bill. I'm open to doing that. Why don't we be sure to vote on it? Representative Olson, why don't you make a motion to adopt the Stephenson provision in the bill.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Representative Scott.
thank you. If we're going to go ahead and take a vote on each individual article, then, I have questions on this section. I thought that we were going to adopt the bill overall, make it, kind of a big omnibus bill, and then have discussion. So if we're going to take an individual vote on each individual section, then I do have questions on this section.
Well, I'm just trying to accommodate the minority on the individual votes. If you want to proceed, and that was what Representative Garofalo was suggesting, and we can just simply proceed with the Eklund provision in the bill and discuss the overall bill then.
Right, that's fine.
Okay. Representative Eklund.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And what this bill came about is about 3 weeks ago or so. Senator Westrom and I started working on it. We're directed by leadership from each body to work on a broadband bill. So we developed this broadband bill, and through discussion and negotiation, we came up with $10 million to go to the Office of Broadband for additional grants, $8 million to go to the school districts, charter schools, and others, education for repayment of money that they had put out to accommodate distance learning, and $2 million towards telemedicine provision for the same type thing as what public health and others have had to put out for their treatment distance meetings that they're having, rather than having the people in face-to-face meetings on the telemedicine, telehealth type things. So in a nutshell, that's what the three provisions in the bill are. And then we do also have language coming up that provides that some of this will be taken out of the CARES Act. With that, Mr. Chair, I could stand for questions.
Well, Representative Eklund, do you want to move the next amendment then?
I would, yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to move the A12 amendment, and as happened in the previous one, nonpartisan staff found some problems with the A12 amendment, technical problems, and Mr. Sullivan, I believe, can address those. So with that, I'll move the A12 amendment and defer to Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Chair and members, this is Colby Sullivan from House Research. Because members adopted Representative Eklund's, or incorporated Representative Eklund's change to the A10, now the A12 needs a small change as well. And that's if Representative Eklund can incorporate the change to delete lines 3 to 5 because the underlying language no longer exists in the A10.
Okay, the motion is before us. Any discussion? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Representative Davney, you have an amendment.
My apologies, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move the A11 amendment.
Okay, the motion is before us. Would you care to explain your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The A11 amendment relates to the distance learning period that schools across the state are in. Students and families, many students and families across the state are having difficulty accessing online educational opportunities, lessons, and the like. This amendment increases the funding in the bill for school districts and charter schools from $8 million to $15 million, and directs the commissioner to distribute that funding, schools to report their expenses so that we as the legislature have a record of what schools have been spending to connect their students with online learning, and then directs the commissioner to distribute the money based on those expenses, or prorated if the $15 million is found to be insufficient.
Okay, the motion is before us. Representative Eklund, any comments? Representative Eklund?
I apologize, Mr. Chair. My kids once told me I wasn't smart enough for a smartphone. They might be right, but no, I appreciate the time, and I think we've shown that we need more funding for broadband, and this is a small way that we can maybe accommodate the state for if or when we have something like this happen in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Okay, the motion is before us. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I'm trying to use the raising my hand feature in this, so I'm not interrupting you. You don't need. So.
Yeah, Representative Garofalo, it's down in the lower left-hand corner, and you were using it before. I don't know what changed, but
I'm using
but anyway,
it now.
I do recognize your voice. So go ahead, Representative Garofalo.
Okay, I don't want to be rude and interrupt whenever I want to talk, because candidly, I'm getting sick of hearing my voice. Representative Dabney, when you refer to the commissioner in section 1 of the bill, of the amendment, it references the commissioner of education, but these grant programs are administered in a different department. Will this give the commissioner of education the oversight over this, or is the decider going to be deed where it's administered from?
Representative, is that directed at Representative Dabney?
Yes, sir.
Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Garofalo, this would be operated through the Department of Education. It mimics the underlying bill, or at this point, underlying amendment in that way.
Okay. And so, Mr. Chairman, and either nonpartisan staff or Representative Dabney or Representative Eklund can address this. So, explain the money path for me. I understand the existing program, but explain to me the money path of where the money comes in and where it goes out if this amendment were adopted.
You mentioned several people. Shall we start?
Whoever wants to answer the question. So.
Okay. Well, I'll ask Representative Eklund. Do you have any thoughts on that, or should we go to staff?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had that same question when Senator Western and I started talking about this, and I was assured that the Department of Education had a grant program set up that they could administer this, because my original thought is to run it all through deed. But other than that, I would like staff to answer the rest of the question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, would that be Mr. Marks or Mr. Sullivan, or
maybe Mr. Marks, Mr. Chair?
Okay, Mr. Marks.
Mr. Chair, this is Bill Marks. I'm not real familiar with this language. I don't know if Mr. Sullivan or if Mr. Strom is on.
Mr. Chair and members, this is Colby. And I apologize, my connection dropped and I'm reconnecting, but I believe the question was, where would the funding come from for these distance learning grants? And as amended with the A12 amendment, the distance learning money, as with the other programs discussed during today's meeting, would be funded from the general fund unless the Commissioner of Management and Budget determines that the money is eligible for Federal CARES Act funding. And in that case, that's where the funding would come from.
Representative Garofalo, did you want to restate your question, or?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Sullivan, and again, if you're the wrong person to ask this question, please, by all means, just feel free to tell me that you don't know, because I think we're all learning here. So I understand that aspect of it, but what this amendment is doing, on the bottom of the amendment, when we're increasing from 8 to 15 million, there's interactions involved with the Office of Broadband, where it's currently funded in deed. I'm trying to figure out how those two overlap over each other. This is a new section of law.
Mr. Sullivan.
I'm sorry. So Mr. Sullivan, so the money that's coming in, we're saying track 1 is exclusively if we get the federal CARES funding, that this money flows directly to the Department of Education. Track 2 is if it's not eligible for CARES funding, then it comes from the general fund via deed, then to education. Is that correct?
Mr. Sullivan?
Mr. Chair and members and Representative Garofalo, that is how I read the A10 amendment, which is the amendment that members are currently considering would increase that $8 million on line 4.19 of the A10. And that language does say that the money is appropriated to deed for transfer to the Commissioner of Education for emergency distance learning grants.
So in a sense, deed becomes a pass-through agency, then, is what my take on that is. Is that correct, Mr. Sullivan?
Mr. Chair and members, I believe that is correct.
Okay, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, so with regards to that scenario B we outlined where it's not CARES funding eligible, we have funds that are currently in, we have general fund appropriations that are currently in that fund. Do those funds flow to the school, to this new section of law? Or is there an additional appropriation to cover that?
Mr. Sullivan?
Mr. Chair and members, I don't know if Mr. Marks has thoughts on that. I'm trying to follow the flow of money too. Let's see, I think, I guess I don't know. Mr. Marks may have thoughts.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, on this, it would be in either case, the flow of the money is basically the same. It goes to deed for transfer to Department of Education. It's going to be federal money. It's going to be general fund money is the first appropriation. However, if the Commissioner of MMB determines it is CARES eligible, then it would be from the Federal CARES Act.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Marks, so is it fair to say once before we have this bill on the floor, I'm assuming that we're going to have an updated research summary that will cover these items. Is that fair?
Mr. Chair, yes.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, so perhaps it would probably just be in interest of the uniqueness of the situation, it'd probably just be best if we review that. Once we vote on it and pass it, then we'll read about it later to know what it is.
Okay, thank you, Representative Garofalo. Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, again, we have to unmute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Motion carried. We now have an amendment by Representative Krisha to the A10. Representative Krisha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair and members, I'll be honest, I was really trying to help. I actually had offered this amendment and Representative Eklund to get us money to the BIA schools as well as some other non-public schools that would be eligible from the CARES Act. And what Commissioner DeVos has said would help. I was trying to get to some areas of need. I think the previous amendment didn't quite get to areas of need. It could have just been allocated out anywhere. Whereas with the broadband program, we go to unserved areas. So what this amendment would have done would have increased the allocation to 15 million for the schools and put it in, and we changed how it's funded. So it could have been directed to areas of need and those that need it the most, as well as the telemedicine. And then I actually had deleted the section on funding the border-to-border broadband because there's already funding there. And in fact, the problem we're going to have, members, is the limited staff indeed may not be able to get that funding out fast enough, and that's not even going to happen until next year. I will be honest, since the beginning of this committee, I am now seeing the confusion, and we were making amendments all the way up to 9 o'clock last night, and now I'm hearing we don't even really know how these things are going to be funded. I have no confidence that my amendment would even go on to a bill that actually is correctly put together. And frankly, I'm disappointed. I haven't had a chance to actually talk to some of the advocates, to talk to the BIA schools, to talk to them about the possibility of this coming into them, gain their support, because everything, and Representative Garofalo, you're right. We've been trying to be accommodating, Mr. Chair. I understand how difficult these are. but that's not an excuse, in my opinion, for not putting it together and doing it right. The broadband program is so important, something near and dear that I've worked on for a long time. My fear is we're going to get this wrong today. We've seen testimony from another member on this committee about how when we get it wrong in special sessions, we get spelling mistakes. We're getting it wrong today on policy and funding. We don't even know if the money is going to come from the right spot. I'm sure, I understand, and I apologize to the staff because I know how hard they've been working, and I know how hard our staff has been working in the late. But we as members should be doing better on this. And I'm going to withdraw my amendment. I'm going to back away. I'm going to let you fix your bill and try to get it correct on the House floor. But right now, I have no confidence this amendment would go on to something that could be effectively administered by anybody with the right policy. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I will pull my amendment.
Okay, and withdrawn. Any further discussion on the A10 amendment as amended? Okay, seeing none. Representative Eklund, any comments before we vote?
Nothing further, Mr. Chair.
Okay, with that, all those in favor of the A10 amendment as amended signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
No.
Motion carried. Representative Eklund?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you want me to?
This would be amendment where you move to.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the language contained in the A10 amendment as amended be included as Article 2 of the COVID-19 Economic Security Act.
Okay, that motion is before us. Any discussion?
And Mr. Chairman, this is the language that matches the section. This is the same language as was in Section 5 of the Hausman Amendment.
This is the language that this wouldn't deal with the Hausman language. This deals with the language that we just were adopting to create an article.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. What I meant was that Representative Hausman moved an amendment earlier that gave the Commissioner of Management and Budget, that directed them to see if it determined if the CARES funding was eligible. Is this the broadband version of that amendment?
Yeah, we're including that language in all of the amendment, or on all of the sections.
Right, and Mr. Chairman, is that the amendment that we're on right now?
This is the amendment to put the A10 amendment as amended into the Economic Security Act. This is what you and I talked about last night now, where we're creating the bill that will have all of the articles that we've been discussing today included in a single bill. The Hausman bill was reported out separately and so on. So we're on a dual track. We have reported some of the bills out separately, and then we're going to have the this bill. I'm trying to avoid the word omnibus, bill with several articles reported out as a separate vehicle as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
we're trying to be prepared for future discussions with the Senate, quite frankly. So it's yet to be determined what the final vehicles will be on the floor of the House. So our role is to give the House the alternative on voting on the bills separately or to vote on the package. And part of that, as I understand, it's going to be discussions with the Senate.
Mr. Chairman.
So what we're doing now is putting the bill together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to clarify. So we are on the Eklund A10 amendment as amended.
That's right.
Okay. And as part, Mr. Chairman, as part of that A10 amendment as amended, we have already included that language from Section 5 of Representative Hausman's amendment, which specified the direction to the Commissioner of MMB to seek to verify that it's CARES funding eligible.
That's my understanding. Representative Marks, as I may interpret that.
Mr. Chair and Representative Garofalo, that language was in the A12 amendment that Representative Eklund moved earlier and was adopted.
And that's what I was meaning, Representative Garofalo. We've been adopting that for each one of the bills.
So, Mr. Chairman, we had, and I'm trying to, my apologies, I'm just trying to track this. We had an oral amendment that was included that Representative Eklund moved. I thought I understood where that amendment was. If you could just, if Mr. Marks, if you could just tell me where that fit in and how and where we're at in that process, the oral amendment that Representative Eklund offered.
Mr. Marks.
Mr. Chair, Representative Garofalo, there were two. In the original A10, he deleted the language on the sentence that starts on line 5.18 with no money and goes on 5.19 and 5.20. So that was deleted. And then in the A12 amendment, lines 1.3 through 1.5 were deleted. And they were deleted because they amended the language that I just referenced earlier that had already been deleted from the A10.
Okay, I don't know where we're at, Mr. Chairman, but this, Mr. Chairman, in the future, I know it takes a little bit longer. We can't be doing oral amendments. I'm sorry. I have 3 separate monitors here, and I'm trying to track it. And I don't know where we're at. I don't know. Maybe other members of the committee know exactly what's going on right now. I know people are doing this with the best of intent, but if we've got to get these amendments packaged together so we can see how they're interacting with each other. It's not a criticism of staff. It's not even a criticism of anyone. We just have to do better.
I am not a fan of oral amendments, but I did talk earlier, and being it was just a striking of basically the one sentence, I said that we would accept it.
But Mr. Chairman, there was also an oral amendment regarding federal language and CARES.
Can be significant.
There was also an oral amendment regarding CARES language.
I'm sorry, we were talking over one another.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. My notes here, what I'm looking at here is that there was an oral amendment involving the CARES language.
Mr. Chair, and this is Bill Marks, if I could clarify. Yes, there was, but that was attempting to, or that would have amended language that was already stricken from the bill. So it was essentially taking, it was the language that was orally deleted was attempting to amend the sentence that had previously been deleted from the bill. And it was basically kind of redundant language that we wanted to get out of there, clear up.
This is the amendment that actually came from our nonpartisan staff, if I recall. Is that correct, Mr. Marks?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
And that's why, as an oral amendment, it seemed to be pretty simple, just the striking of that sentence and source of the amendment. That's why I agreed to accept it. Otherwise, Representative Garofalo, the preference is that amendments be in writing. We are in a little different circumstance right now with people located in various locations and what have you. Okay, we have the motion before us. Representative Eklund, would you care to renew your motion?
And Mr. Chair, I did have my hand up.
Well, I don't see a hand. Who is this speaking?
Representative Krisha, and I did use the raise hand feature.
Oh, there we are. I found you. Yeah. Okay, Representative Krisha.
Okay, thank you. Representative and to Mr. Chair and to the testifier, just a couple questions, not testifier, to the bill author. I have to ask Representative Eklund, knowing the intent of the border-to-border broadband is to first and foremost get to the unserved areas, those that have no access. Do you have confidence that the amendment that went on, the A11, actually keeps the integrity of that? Or can you tell me how that has changed, how the broadband funds will be distributed now?
Mr. Chair, Representative Krisha, I do have confidence that we will be fine with this. And after discussing with the Office of Broadband, and I believe Ms. Dickinson is on, if she can provide further clarity to your question.
Ms. Dickinson, are you on?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Representative
Identify yourself for the record.
My name is Angie Dickinson. I am with the Office of Broadband Development at DEED.
And did you hear the question?
I believe the question was how we would be able to proceed with the grant round to provide funds to the unserved areas, and we would use the same process that we have in place today, but specifically limiting this, if it was this $10 million in funding, limiting those funds to areas that are unserved.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Kresha.
Thank you. Follow up. Ms. Dickinson, with all due respect, that I'm not talking about the broadband border-to-border program. I think that program is still fine with the challenge language and all that. My worry is with the A11 and how we've now taken the dollars that are going to be directed from the 8 million to the education, and now it's 15. Do we have the same protections on there that we work so hard for in the border-to-border that wouldn't allow for overbuilding in some areas and completely ignoring unserved areas of the state, which frankly, Representative Eklund, you represent a lot of that. We've been trying to get up into your northern regions. That's the area of concern. So to the bill author or the amendment author and to the testifier, Ms. Dickinson, do you have confidence or do we have the ability to make sure those funds are administered using the same border-to-border policies and challenge procedures, not to overbuild areas and leave unserved areas alone?
Ms. Dickinson?
Mr. Chair, Representative Kresha, yes, I do have confidence that we would administer the program in the exact same way that we do today, using the same process, again, making sure that these funds were distributed and deployed to provide infrastructure in unserved areas of the state and using our existing processes to prevent overbuilding.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, I'll just wrap it up. Is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Representative Kresha.
Thank you. And so Representative Eklund, I'm trying to throw you a lifeline here. Ms. Dickinson, I understand what you're saying and you're confining your remarks to the border-to-border program, but there is money that's appropriated that's going to work through the Department of Education. Representative Eklund, I'm telling you as somebody who is a very big proponent of broadband and unserved, you need to look very closely at this to make sure we don't lose those gains and that money doesn't go to areas that are already overbuilt. I'm sharing that with you, and I hope you get a chance to look at that before this moves to the House floor.
Representative Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Kresha, I appreciate your comments. In working on this bill with Senator Westrom and other staff, we've had plenty of discussions along that line, and I believe that we will not compromise the system in providing these grants to telemedicine and education.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, Representative Eklund, would you care to renew your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I renew my motion that the language contained in the A10 amendment as amended be included as Article 2 of the COVID-19 Economic Security Act.
Okay, any further discussion? I think this one will require a roll call vote. Ms. Sparkman? Being that we're in essence taking action on a bill.
One moment. Representative Carlson?
Aye.
Representative Olson?
Aye.
Representative Garofalo?
No.
Representative Albright excused. Representative Bernardi? Representative Davids excused. Representative Davney.
Aye.
Representative Driscowski.
No.
Representative Eklund.
Aye.
Representative Hamilton.
No.
Representative Hansen.
Aye.
Representative Hausman.
Aye.
Representative Hertas.
No.
Representative Hornstein.
Aye.
Representative Kresha.
No.
Representative Liebling.
Aye.
Representative Lilly.
Aye.
Representative Long.
Aye.
Representative Mariani.
Aye.
Representative Marquardt.
Aye.
Representative Nelson.
Aye.
Representative Noor.
Aye.
Representative Pulowski. Representative Poppy.
Aye.
Representative Schumacher excused. Representative Scott.
Oh.
Representative Torkelson.
No.
Representative Vogel excused. Representative Wagenius.
Aye.
Representative Bernardi. And Representative Pulowski. I have 16 ayes and 7 nays.
Okay, the motion prevails. Let me ask a question. We've got 1, 2, 3, about 4 or 5 roll calls coming up if we proceed. Would it be all right with the committee if we operate with a voice vote, but if anybody wants a roll call, they can request it and then we would proceed? That's often the way we would do it in committee. Otherwise, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 more roll calls. Any thoughts on that? Well, we'll make the motions, and then if you want a roll call, request one, and then if not, we'll take a voice vote. Representative Hausman.
I move that the language previously adopted in the House File 4541 as amended be incorporated as Article 3 of the COVID-19 Economic Security Act.
Okay, and this is the procedure now to bill the bill. The motion is before us. Any discussion? Any requests for a roll call? Okay, seeing none then, all those in favor of the motion, excuse me, Representative Scott. Your hand went up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My hand's been up since before the last roll call because I really wasn't clear of what we were voting on. It wasn't restated. And so I just ask for the future to restate. If the chair could restate what we're voting on, it would be helpful. Thank you.
The motion was in fact made twice, and then I called on Representative Eklund to renew his motion. And what he moved the second time was I moved that the language contained in the A10 amendment as amended be included in Article 2 of the COVID-19 Economic Security Act. So I think, Representative Scott, we did do that, but we'll pay attention to make sure it's done. So,
Mr. Chair, my main thing is I just want to know when we're going to be having discussion on the entire bill. So if you could make that really clear, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, when we're done with these motions, then it'll be the entire bill before the final one. That one will be a roll call for sure. Representative Hausman, would you care to restate your motion?
I will renew my motion that the language previously adopted in House File 4541 as amended be incorporated as Article 3 of the COVID-19 Economic Security Act.
Okay, again, that motion is before us. Any discussion? And are there any requests for a roll call? Okay, seeing none then, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carried. Representative Olson.
Mr. Chair, I move that the language previously adopted in House File 168 as amended be incorporated as Article 4 of the COVID Economic Security Act.
Okay, that motion is before us. Any discussion? Okay, would you care to restate the motion?
Mr. Chair, I renew my motion that the language previously adopted in House File 168 as amended be incorporated as Article 4 of the COVID-19 Economic Security Act.
Just trying to make sure everybody knows exactly what we're voting on. Any requests for a roll call? Seeing none then, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
Motion carried. We have Representative Olson.
Mr. Chair, I move the H1507 A9 amendment.
Okay, and this is standard language that Mr. Marks generally prepares for us. Mr. Marks, if you could mention what the language does. It's
Mr. Chair, members, this is just to say that since we're sending out two separate bills with the same appropriations in, this is to say that if they would get enacted, an appropriation was enacted more than once, it's only to be given effect once. This is largely so we just count it only once.
okay, so it's an accounting protection section, I guess. Okay, any discussion? Seeing none then, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carried. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have to figure out a mechanism where the raising of the hands feature is working. I'm not sure. I don't. Do you? When I'm pressing my button here, do you see my hand being raised? I'm turning it on and off right now.
The first part of the meeting, it was raised, and it's being raised back and forth now.
Okay.
But there was about a big part of the meeting where it was not coming up at all, but I recognized you by voice.
Okay. So we have to, maybe when we're done with this meeting, if we're going to be having future meetings, we got to figure out how to make that work. I just wanted to tell you that previous amendment, on behalf of the Republican caucus, we enthusiastically support that amendment. That we only spend the money once when we appropriate. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're very welcome, Representative Garofalo. And maybe I can ask this: was anybody else having problems with the raising of the hand? Seemed to be working quite well, and even for you, Representative Garofalo, until we got to right at midpoint in the meeting, where all of a sudden it didn't seem to be working. But at any rate, if somebody doesn't get recognized because their hand didn't go up, we'll operate just like we did with Representative Garofalo. We don't want to exclude anybody because the blue hand didn't go up. Okay, we have Representative Olson.
Mr. Chair, so this is going, now we're moving on to the renewing of the, I'm renewing my motion. House File 1507 as amended be recommended to be placed on the general register, and that staff be directed to make technical corrections and amend the title.
Okay, that motion is before us, and this is where Representative Scott wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity to comment. So I don't see any blue hands yet. This is final passage, Representative Scott. You wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to come in.
Thank you. And this is probably for Representative Stephenson. I don't know if he's still on the call or not. No?
Oh, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, great. So if you could point to, well, first of all, the Minnesota Investment Fund, can you explain to me how it comes into play in your in your section of this newly adopted bill, or about to be adopted?
Representative Stephenson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Scott, I don't know if you can add more detail to your question there. The bill the bill provides funding for DEED's emergency loan program. The sources of the funding are the CARES Act fund and the emergency small business guarantee program that we previously passed. It is the case that the Minnesota Investment Fund MIF money was used in the initial appropriation that the legislature made several weeks ago to DEED's emergency loan program, but we are not taking any money from MIF in this bill. I don't know if that answers your question.
Mr. Chair. Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. And Representative Stephenson, that does answer my question. I have a question regarding whether any of these funds would be used to cover any sort of a hole in our budget. What I'm trying to get away from, and I think in my questioning of Representative Hausman, I think and then Representative Creech's questioning about the broadband, my concerns are that, we might be supplanting our current budget shortfalls and trying to use these CARES funds to backfill any of that. And so I don't know if Representative Stephenson wants to give us some assurances that that's not what's taking place here, or if Representative Hausman can give assurances that that's not what's taking place, or Representative Eklund. But that's one of the concerns I have, because in the guidance that we do have from the federal government on these COVID Relief Act, on the COVID Relief Act, it strictly prohibits that.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Stephenson.
I certainly can provide assurance as to Article 1 that the bill is not supplanting something else in our budget. It's a new appropriation for a program that did not exist before the pandemic. And I would further say that I've reviewed the guidance issued by the Treasury Department, and I think that this funding is specifically identified as permissible in the guidance that the Treasury Department issued.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could Representative Hausman answer kind of the same question, that this isn't supplanting money that was already going to be in the budget, but now that we're facing a big shortfall, that we're just, trying to use these COVID funds to backfill any needs that we have?
Yes, Mr. Chair and Representative Scott. This is, so Article 3 now would be very specifically responding to those who've been affected by COVID.
Okay, thank you. And then if Representative Eklund could weigh in on that too, that same question. He's still on the line.
Representative Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Scott. I believe it looks like the CARES Act is the money for the education and the telemedicine it definitely should be covered from what we can understand. I do not know that if the appropriation for the broadband grant is, if that answers your question, Representative Scott.
Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate everybody weighing in on that, all the authors of these different sections. And then, Mr. Chair, if I might, I just want to clarify that if we are unable to use COVID relief funds for any section of this bill, that the plan would be to use general fund dollars going forward. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the way the bill stands now.
Thank you.
Although I would like to footnote that at least our early read, there are several provisions here that seem like they would qualify for the federal funds. And we're going to be learning more detail about that as we move forward. And one of the things that we may do, Representative Garofalo made the request, and I think it's probably a good one, that when the department is ready, we'll invite Commissioner Franz in to give us an update on any of the details relative to federal fund spending. But that's yet to be determined. They're still working on many of those issues to get clarification. So with that, any further, Representative Garofalo, your hand is up. It's blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you again for communicating with me yesterday about what to expect for today's committee. Also, thank you to all the staff for being accommodating. Obviously, the limitations of doing this remotely as opposed to in person make some people's jobs significantly harder and much more challenging. And on behalf of all the members, we just want to say thank you to the staff for their service and what they're doing. Regarding the bills that are coming before us today, it's no secret that we face a very difficult and challenging environment. I do want to highlight some very deep concerns I have on a personal level. And let me begin by saying that these comments are in no way partisan. We all have roles to play in the legislature. Those roles change based on the position we hold at a certain time of majority or minority party status or in a leadership role. I commit to you that the concerns I'm about to raise have nothing to do with my current role, and they're rooted in mathematics and my history of being in the legislature. The first things first is that we are currently under an emergency declaration in our state. This emergency declaration gives an incredible amount of concentrated power to one person. It gives that power to the governor. The intent of that legislation is that in a time of extreme crisis, the normal deliberative and patient decision-making of the legislative process is inadequate to respond to current events. And when this emergency declaration started over 7 weeks ago, it's something that I and many other people supported. Again, the emphasis of this being not whether the individual policies were right or wrong, the focus being that you cannot have a deliberative process when you need to respond in real time in a moment of crisis to get appropriate decision-making to take place. And again, I supported that. However, we are now entering the 7th week of this process. We saw a fiscal note that was before us today that is assuming that this emergency power is going to last through the end of June. That level of concentrated decision-making, of centralized decision-making, is incompatible with our form of government. And I want to make sure that we're very distinct about what I'm pointing out here. In times of crisis, it is a necessary evil. We have no other choice. We have to function. And that's what the statute exists for. However, when we're talking about this extending not only additional weeks, but months, reasonable people can ask, when is this emergency going to end? When are we going to get rid of this this unprecedented decision-making that one person is deciding right now? It is a law of decision-making that when fewer people are making more decisions, you have unintended consequences. And I would hope that while the governor is of the majority party, belongs to the same party as the majority party, I would hope that members take that very seriously. The concerns I have about Governor Walz, a DFL, or having this extended power are the same concerns I would have about Donald Trump, who claims to be a Republican and is the president of the United States right now. The same concerns apply to that. And so I would hope that members please take that into consideration in both your public and your private conversations, that now is the time for us to begin the process of winding down these emergency powers. Whatever executive orders are in place that we agree or disagree with, those can be taken care of by the legislature. We can put timeframes, timetables, and performance goals into them, and we can restrain the concentrated power of the executive branch right now. But now is the time for us to be having those conversations. The second point I'd like to bring up is the budget situation. We're going to be getting an updated revenue forecast next week. The only thing we know about it is it'll be wrong. We know because it's an estimate of what the remaining 14 months of our budget cycle are going to look like. And it is crucially important on both sides of the aisle. Now I'll start with my side of the aisle, that Republicans are not out promising tax cuts to people that we have no way of paying for from a balanced budget. It is equally important that members of the DFL are not reaching out to the public and making commitments of spending that we have zero chance of being able to pay for. I would highlight my previous comments I've made that the state unemployment rate right now is over 20%, that over 1 out of 5 Minnesotans are unemployed. It is also based on the forecasting model that we are going to be facing double-digit unemployment for an extended period of time through the end of this year in a duration of 2021. Before this situation, I had never seen an unemployment rate of double digits in Minnesota. In fact, I have to look it up, but Mr. Chairman, even you, I don't believe you've had to face double-digit unemployment in the state of Minnesota in your legislative service. And that's a really long time. So I want to highlight that there is a pre-COVID-19 mindset and a post-COVID-19 mindset. And it's very important that all of us, while we fulfill our roles and our responsibilities, that we understand that we're in a different world right now. And my concern is that I am not seeing as many members reflecting this post-COVID-19 mindset. So that's all I had to say. I'll be voting no on today's bill. I want to thank our nonpartisan staff. Hopefully they can get the bill in the form that they that is necessary so we can at least understand what we're voting on the floor. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you allowing me this indulgence to speak to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Pawlowski is next.
I just have a question. Mr. Chair, I have a question. Apparently, when I left my phone unmuted, I was heard. But when I left my phone unmuted to vote, I may not have been heard. So I've emailed Nancy Conley to see what the glitch is, because apparently, again, I'm still having a problem either being heard or there's some blocking that's going on. And Mr. Chair, after the vote, I would then like to make a request of the committee. So when we're done voting, could I be called on to make a request?
Yeah, just be sure your hand is up as a reminder for me.
Mr. Chair, I'm voting. Mr. Chair, I'm voting by phone. So when I hit *9, there's a delay. There's a delay in my hand going up apparently also. So okay. I'll try to do it, but again, I'm doing this by phone, not through Zoom. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
I wrote down your name, so we'll get back to you then, hopefully. But let me. I think we heard you when you were voting. If I recall, Ms. Sparkman, did we hear Pawlowski when he was voting?
On the most recent vote, I did not hear a vote.
So he's not recorded as voting?
That's correct.
Mr. Chair?
Representative Pawlowski.
Mr. Chair, I voted unmuted twice, once on the first roll call, and then when she came back, and on the second one, I said Pawlowski votes aye. The phone was unmuted both times. So I am not sure what the problem is, but there is certainly an issue somewhere.
So you were attempting to vote yes. Is there any objection if Representative Pawlowski is recorded as voting yes? He was attempting online. We're dealing with new ground with technology. I don't see any objection. So we will respect your intent to have been voting yes. Everybody in agreement?
Mr. Chair.
You're
That's
very
fine,
well.
Mr. Chairman. Representative Pawlowski, we just need you to explain to us what you were voting on.
Thank you, Representative Garofalo, but I'll pass on that.
Okay, so Ms. Barkman, you got that then. We had, let's see, another hand up. Representative Lieberling.
All right, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. And I just wanted to respond, as I often do, to my litter mate, Representative Garofalo. And I appreciate your comments, Representative Garofalo, and that you're being very serious here. And I just did want to respond on both fronts. First of all, on the issue of concentrated power, I think we all agree with that. I think we all agree it is not ideal. We have our form of government for a reason. And I think we all agree that having more voices, having more input is better, that we get better results. But I do want to just caution that the emergency is in no way over. I just was looking at the data from today, and new cases are up. Deaths are again at the highest. I think it's the highest total that we've seen on any day. So we are in no way out of the emergency. That's the first thing. The second is I got some feedback, I'm sure other members did, about the vote on the floor on the resolution to end the emergency. The problem is you can't end the emergency and the governor's authority and not have it replaced with something. So, this reminds me very much of repeal and replace of the Affordable Care Act, right? You can repeal all you want, but you better have something there because things have to continue in this emergency. So there is that issue. So it's not, I think, that we DFLers don't take this issue very seriously. We do, but we realize that we have to have a lot of these powers have to be in place because they're still very much needed. And I see the governor as cautiously opening things up and ramping things down. And I hope that soon there will be an ability to resume. But I also want to say, here we are today passing bills. We are exercising our power as a legislature. So there's a certain irony to be complaining, if you will, in this forum that we are not being able to act as a legislature. In fact, that's exactly what we're doing right now, is acting with our legislative powers. So there's that. On the funding piece, I just wanted to comment that we are all aware that we're heading into this really difficult situation, and none of us exactly knows how this is going to look. But I think I've said before, we have to use the tools that are available for us to help our people get through the emergency. So to say, well, we don't have any money, we won't have any money, therefore we're not going to spend money that's needed today to get our people through this very trying and urgent time, I think would be irresponsible. So I appreciate that we all see somewhat of the same problem, but we view differently what our responsibility is. And I just wanted to put that out there. I do appreciate that this is a constructive dialogue, and I hope we'll continue to have a constructive dialogue. But personally, I see this very differently than what you've laid out. And just wanted to put that on the record, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And any further discussion? I was just going to comment. I heard about a week ago a nursing home in my district had something like about 12 deaths. If you saw the Tribune this morning, there's a headline, that same nursing home is 47 deaths. So pretty sobering. I had gotten a phone call yesterday informing me of what was happening in that nursing home. And there's one right across the road from it that's of equal size. We haven't gotten any information, or at least I haven't on that one yet, but there's certainly a lot of issues out there and a lot of families being impacted. One of the people in the Tribune this morning has had 3 roommates, all have passed away. He's 85 and he's the survivor of the 3 different roommates, if you saw the story. So I think we've got a ways to go before we're totally out of the woods, so to speak, on this issue. But at any rate, no further discussion. So this is final passage, so we'll take the roll. Ms. Sparkman? Or restate the motion. Representative Olson, you want to restate the motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I renew my motion that House File 1507 as amended recommended to be placed on the general register and that staff be directed to make title.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none then.
Mr. Chair. Just wanted to remind you that Representative Pulaski wanted to be recognized again.
Yeah, he said after this vote. He wanted to be recognized before we adjourned. That was, and by the way, his blue hand is up, so he got that done. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, then the Clerk will take the roll. Ms. Sparkman.
Representative Carlson,
Aye.
Representative Olson,
Aye.
Representative Garofalo,
No.
Representative Albright, excused. Representative Bernardi, Representative Bernardi, Representative Davids, excused. Representative Dabney,
Aye.
Representative Drazkowski, Representative Eklund,
Aye.
Representative Hamilton,
No.
Representative Hansen,
Aye.
Representative Hausman,
Aye.
Representative Hertas,
No.
Representative Hornstein,
Aye.
Representative Kresha,
No.
Representative Liebling,
Aye.
Representative Lilly,
Aye.
Representative Long,
Aye.
Representative Mariani, Representative Marquardt,
Aye.
Representative Nelson,
Aye.
Representative Noor,
Aye.
Representative Pulowski,
Pulowski votes aye.
Representative Poppy,
Poppy votes aye.
Representative Schumacher, excused. Representative Scott,
Oh,
Representative Torkelson,
No.
Representative Vogel, excused. Representative Wagenius.
Aye.
Representative Drazkowski,
No.
Representative Mariani.
Aye.
18 ayes, 7 nays.
Oh, did everybody have a chance to vote?
Mr. Chair, Representative Bernardi keeps trying to be recognized.
Yeah, did we get a, that's why I'm asking, did we get a vote from Representative Bernardi?
I have her recorded as a yes vote.
Hey, Representative Bernardi, you've got your hand up. Representative Bernardi. I assume that's to make sure it was you had voted. I recognized her. I don't hear her responding. Okay, with
Chair,
that,
this is Representative Hertas.
Representative Hertas.
Thank you. I believe that I heard Representative Drazkowski vote the first time. He was called again. Watching the person taking the roll, that appeared that she didn't hear him again. So I think you should verify that you have a recorded vote for him.
I do have a recorded no vote, or vote no.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. We all have to be alert with the new technology, so we'll do our very best. But thank you, Representative Hertas. Okay, with that, motion prevails. Bill has passed and will be on general orders. Before we adjourn, Representative Pulowski wanted to be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a request of the committee that when we get the new fiscal forecast on Tuesday, that we also have a review from either staff or Commissioner Franz on the governor's power to unallot to balance the budget when we are either in session or out of session.
You'd like that part of the presentation on Wednesday? Is that what you're?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like a presentation from either Commissioner Franz or staff on the governor's power to unallot to balance the budget when we are either in session or out of session.
Okay. We'll give them a heads up. We probably be a good idea maybe to hear from MMB, but we can check with our staff as well.
Thank you, Mr.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And by the way, just to buy a couple of quick announcements. One is that there's a good chance that we will probably be meeting potentially virtually every day next week. You've probably notice that there's a number of bills now being re-referred to Ways and Means, and we're the final stop before they hit the House floor. So we're down to just a few days with the regular session. So that's when this committee becomes a very busy one. So watch for the announcements as to what bills and what time we'll be meeting. Ms. Conley, is there anything else that we need to remind people of?
Mr. Chair, I think you covered it all. Thank you.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you, members. And I would like to, those comments by Representative Garofalo thanking staff. I want to second that. The staff has worked very hard, and these are not the easiest of circumstances. They're working from home, and sometimes they have limited equipment available, but they've been doing a marvelous job, and I want to personally thank them as well. With that, meeting adjourned.